Well, Washington may be weighing new restrictions on chips exported to China. That's according to a new report from the Wall Street Journal. And this comes as analysts are looking ahead to Micron's earnings after the bell today in its first report since committing $600 million to build out its Chinese factory. That's coming after the country banned Micron from supplying its chips. And Stifel issuing a bearish call ahead of Micron's earnings report, saying China poses another detour in the chipmaker's path to profitability. Brian Chin, the author of that report at Stifel, is joining us now. Brian, thanks for being here. Obviously, a lot of moving parts here this morning as we look at this new report out of the Journal. I want to ask you about that first. That doesn't seem to have further implications for Micron, if I'm reading it correctly. But tell me if I'm wrong. What does that report mean for Micron and the other chip makers that you cover?
Yeah, so Micron is the chip maker that I cover here at Stifel, but I'd say these restrictions or potential restrictions seem to be levied towards GPUs, which is not what I cover specifically, but one of my colleagues does. So I would say that the Micron ban is sort of in its separate sort of zone relative to maybe the potential discussion that's being talked about this morning. And that was pretty clear about a month ago. China said that some users of critical infrastructure within China are going to be restricted from using Micron chips within their products. And so really the question is, what is the definition of that critical infrastructure and how significant, could that pose a revenue risk? And we think that kind of starts to pop in maybe in the August quarter, which will be the outlook for Micron this afternoon.
Does this significantly change any valuations and how you would look at these companies, Brian? Yeah,
so what we've been doing, Brad, since the past 3 quarters plus is we've actually used sort of a tangible book value way of looking at this, because what's happened in this downturn is that profitability and even book value has been eroded. And so we've used that really as kind of the anchoring point here. And to really kind of flip the script here and go to a metric that's more based on profitability, we want to see that crossover back to profitability occur. And right now, we don't model that occurring for Micron, and I think consensus is there or thereabouts with us. It's not until the May quarter of next year when we see that crossover back to profitability. So that's kind of something we're looking for to maybe pull in to maybe get even more constructive on the stock right now.
And how should investors be thinking about the China part of it? I mean, as you write in your note, what's going on already, not today's report, but what we already know about Micron in China could affect 12 to 13% of its total sales. But when do we sort of expect more clarity on that?
Yeah, so again, that initial restriction was announced about a month ago. And subsequent to that, the company has come out in a couple of different forums. And after initially trying to quantify that as sort of like a low to high single digit risk, updated towards the high end of that range, updated towards, say, 12 to 13%, kind of low teens. And so every subsequent update over the past 4 weeks has been kind of to the negative. And so the way we look at that is sort of, if Micron's exposure is 25% in China, the worst case scenario is that 25% goes away. I think that's a little bit harsh, but the best case scenario was kind of the initial discussion points or quantification of that. And so, I think there's probably some natural reluctance of people building products in China, phones, PCs for consumption within China. There might be some initial reluctance to necessarily use Micron until they get further clarity, which isn't to say that they won't eventually be okay shipping into certain entities there. But I just think there's that kind of confusion could bear a little bit more risk in terms of the August quarter outlook.
And so in the outlooks that we're expecting, not just from Micron later on today, but even further updates around where these partnerships among the chip making side of the generative AI kind of hype phase that we've seen thus far, where that will actually kind of get us into the margin generation phase, as you were laying out a moment ago. What kind of reasonable timeline should investors expect there?
Yes, I think the question is sort of, when does some of the potential positive stimulus from infrastructure to build out generative AI start to maybe impact companies, chip making? It could be, Micron. It's hard to say precisely, but those aspects of AI compute seem to account for maybe just a single digit percent of total consumption for memory today. And so certainly something we think is going to grow significantly over time, but I'll bring off a low base. And Micron specifically, they backed a different technology than high bandwidth memory initially. And so they're kind of having to play a little bit of catch up, I think, in terms of competitively. And we're looking for signs that they're going to be successful doing that over the next half year or so. And so I think it's certainly a positive in sort of what's been multiple quarters of mostly negatives in the memory space, but maybe still not moving the needle to compensate for sort of the sluggish demand in phones and PCs that we've seen.
Yeah, and what would sort of, I mean, you've got a hold on the stock right now. What would sort of unlock value for you at Micron? What would change your opinion? What would be that like key sign that you're looking for that demand is improving or to change your thinking on the stock?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the one thing we say and we've thought, and has played out over time, Julie, but it's pricing is really the key fulcrum in any time we model estimates for a memory company or company, obviously like Micron. And so right now, you really would need a V-shaped recovery in pricing in order to, that could quickly regenerate margins fairly rapidly, right? And the issue being that of late, memory suppliers like Micron have had, let's call it 2 to 3 quarters of inventory on hand. And the target level is probably about a quarter, right? So you've got sort of this higher elevated inventory, which may even rise a little bit based on the near-term China effects. And really, you want to see some of that really cleared out in order to recapture some of this pricing power. And that would flow into sort of the V-shaped margin recovery, pricing recovery and margin recovery that we'd like to see to get us more constructive.
Well, we're looking ahead to those numbers after the close and looking forward to them. Brian Chin, thanks for helping us set up for that. Analyst over at Stifel who covers Micron. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.